What's up, Ace family? It's Austin here, back with another amazing family vlog. Today we've got a short story from an author who goes by the name Andy. So, Andy, thank you for submitting this. They do support me on Patreon, so I want to give a huge thanks for that as well. This is a short story titled It's a Cold, Cold, Brutal World. So, there are some content warnings. We've got mentions of war, a few scenes involving shootings. There's the use of an ethnic slur that's used against Hispanic and Latina Americans. I'm not going to say it, but you will see. I'm not going to say it aloud, but you will see it here in the text. And there's a scene of prejudice against a Latino man. So be advised. As far as notes go, Andy also wrote, "This is my first time writing a short story this long, and I am just now getting serious and learning the rules of writing and storytelling, so it might not be the best, and feedback is greatly appreciated." All right, I can sympathize because my short stories almost always end up being longer, like way longer than I intended. So yeah, let's take a look. The really hard thing about long short stories is like finding a place to publish them, because I feel like most journals don't take stories longer than like 8,000 words, but that's not true of every journal. Anyway, before we get started, I am going to read this as I always do. Keep in mind, I am not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself. Just keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. So, here we go. It's a Cold, Cold, Brutal World. Holy Roller by AWOL Nation. Oh, you know what I'm just realizing? Um, I think the story is actually called Cycles. That's what the PDF is titled. And then I think this is just a foreword, a little quote from AWOL Nation, who I'm not familiar with. Probably a band, right? I don't know. Anyway, we'll see how relevant that is. Personally, I don't like these things very much. I don't know. I think stories should just begin where they begin, right? Anyway, just my opinion. 1. Alejandro waited at the bus stop on a cold, snowy New England morning. He wore an oversized puffy jacket, 2 pairs of gloves, and baggy sweatpants. Okay, so immediately I'm noticing the clarity, which is super appreciated. Like, the sentences are very clear, very concise, and I imagine we'll see some longer sentences, and if these first 2 sentences are anything to go off of, they will also be clear, easy to follow. That's probably the very first thing that I look for in a short story. Second thing, and I don't know, maybe this is actually the first thing, I don't know, hard to say, but is this a great hook? I don't mean to be rude, but I don't know that it is. Alejandro waited at the bus stop on a cold, snowy New England morning. I don't know, it's like, I think I said this in the video yesterday or maybe the day before, but a lot of readers, a lot of like editors and a lot of readers for lit magazines, they really want to be able to see the stakes right in the first line. Now, I will say this is a good first line in that it gives us Alejandro and that it gives us our setting, right? Our main character, presumably, and our setting. And that's economic establishment, that's economic exposition, which is awesome. But yeah, I think we would rather start with some action or some dialogue, right? Anyway, let's keep going and we'll see where we go from here. He also wore a scarf that protected his old face and gray beard from the snow. Okay, that's also pretty economic exposition, letting us know how old approximately Alejandro is. It was funny. When Alejandro was young, he had always imagined that if he ever immigrated to the United States, he would move to a place like Los Angeles or Miami, with a climate similar to El Salvador. But when your country is in a civil war, and you live near the action, you take what you can get, and when your cousin offers you to move into his apartment in cold Massachusetts, you take it. Okay, this might be cliche, but you could actually start with, like, a memory, from Alejandro's time in El Salvador, right? Uh, just an option as far as ways that you can open this story. But, like I said, like I've been saying, this is all very economic exposition, which I appreciate. Alejandro no longer lives with his cousin. Sorry, I I had so much pause there because I read the line in my mind first, and the switch to present tense kinda threw me off. Um, but okay, so when your country's in a civil war, you take what you can get, and when your cousin offered you to move into his apartment in cold Massachusetts, you take it. So you could just reword that to keep the past tense. You could say, like, "But Alejandro moved out not long ago," or something like that. He got it he got into an argument with him 2 years after he moved in. What the argument was about, Alejandro couldn't remember, or at least he didn't want to. He excuse me. He hated arguments. It always gave him anxiety. I would say they always gave him anxiety, especially when it was between him and his parents. It was one of the main reasons he moved to the United States, besides the war. I would go with a period or a semicolon there, but that's just nitpicking. Okay, we're back to tense, which throws me once again. He lives in a small apartment in Lynn now with roommates he has barely interacted with since he moved in, but he likes it that way. It brought him a sense of peace in a way. So I would get rid of one of these ways because they're used back to back in two sentences. And then in that previous sentence, we also had, oh, never mind. Yeah, I was mistaken. Oh, maybe it was the use of the word moved in this sentence and then also in this sentence. Yeah. So, yeah, these are things to be conscious of. When the bus finally came, Alejandro stepped inside, took 2 crumpled dollar bills out of his pocket, and gave them to the bus driver. He sat down and stared at the snowy scenery while waiting for the bus to stop at the local elementary school, where he worked as a janitor. Okay, again, effective exposition, I think. Very clear. Um, Another slight nitpick. I don't think people do pay the bus drivers directly, right? I think there's like a box for your cash. Then again, can't say I've ever been to Massachusetts, so what do I know? He sat down and stared at the snowy scenery while waiting for the bus to stop at the local. Oh, sorry, I read that already. Where he worked as a janitor. When he got inside the school, he went to punch in and he saw his coworker, Alex, scrolling on his phone. Hey, Alejandro, he said, still not taking his eyes off his phone. Hey, Alex, how's your night? Alejandro asked, punching in. Um, I don't know that you need the action there, actually. And in fact, I don't think you need this sentence at all, this phrase at all. I think it's clear that Alejandro is speaking here. Again, just my opinion. It was good. I had some drinks with my boys, and we got a little plastered, Alex said with a smile. I bet that was fun, Alejandro said with a chuckle, hanging his jacket up and getting his work uniform. All right, let's get ready to work, Alex. Mm, yeah, I would just, like, clean up some of the dialogue tags here. The previous narration up here, it's all quite clear and concise, I think, and I think, you could kind of streamline some of the language here. Um, get rid of dialogue tags where you don't need them, like this one again. It's clear that Alejandro is speaking, right? It's just the 2 of them. I think you should always get rid of dialogue tags where they're unneeded, and then I I think I'd mentioned this yesterday too, but, I would encourage changing gerund verbs into just actual verbs, right? So we'll take this line, we could rewrite this as, "I bet that was fun. He hung his jacket up and got his work uniform. Alright, let's get ready to work." And you don't need Alex there because, it's already clear who he's talking to, right? Anyway, I that's just an example of how you might streamline some of that language. I do appreciate though that you, Andy, are trying to do some showing rather than telling with some of these character actions. Yeah. And I like what we get from this dialogue, right? It sounds like Alex is young and maybe reckless, right? Alejandro liked his job better than the other jobs he had. All he had to do was mop the floors, clean the bathroom occasionally, and pick up the kids' trash after lunch. It was easy, and while he had to deal with the occasional child vomit, it wasn't as bad as what he had to do when he worked on his parents' farm. When Alejandro and Alex's lunchtime came around, that's when they would talk. Or, to be more specific, it would be when Alex would go on for their whole lunchtime to go into detail about his previous nights with his friends and all the fun stuff they did, and Alejandro would listen and nod his head, not adding much to the conversation. Okay, that's a pretty lengthy sentence, and it is quite clear for the most part, but even still, I think you could streamline this language further. And again, you can call this nitpicking, but like, the writing is pretty tight. I think it's good. And so there's really not much more for me to critique other than saying, like, you can make it even tighter, right? So you could say Alejandro and Alex always talked at lunchtime. Alex would go on for their whole lunch. Alex would go on for the whole hour or something like that and go into detail about his nights with friends, all the fun stuff they did. And Alejandro would listen and nod his head. He never had much to add to the conversations. Something like that, right? Anyway, but Alejandro enjoyed it. Just hearing all the fun stuff Alex did was entertaining, even if he didn't understand what he was saying half the time. After lunch, the children left school, and Alejandro and Alex finished their shifts. Um, is that to say that, like, Alejandro and Alex have lunch at the last hour of the school day, and so the kids all leave after they have lunch? Because in most, public schools, there's lunch, but then there's usually like 2 or 3 more hours of school after that, right? Um, so yeah, just the time confuses me a little bit here, that's all. So, got any plans today? Alejandro asked, clocking out. Yeah, my buddies and I are going to see the Celtics game tonight, Alex said, taking his jacket from the hanger. How about you? I'm not planning on doing anything today. I'm just going to stay home, he said, putting on his scarf. All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow, Alejandro. Okay, so this is another issue when it comes to turning verbs into gerunds, is that it starts to all feel really repetitive. So here we have dialogue, and then it ends. Alejandro asked, clocking out. And then we have more dialogue, and it ends. Alex said, taking his jacket. And then we have more dialogue, and it ends. He said, putting on his scarf. It's the same structure for all three of those pieces of dialogue. And I think the reader's going to clock that, even on a subconscious level. So, like I said, eliminate dialogue tags where they're unneeded. Make the action a little smoother, a little tighter by just using the verb as a non-gerund, right? As just the standard form of the verb. And I think that should make things a little, like I said, tighter. All right, well, I'll see you tomorrow, Alejandro. See you, Alex, he said as they exited the school building. When Alejandro got home to his apartment, he saw his roommate passed out on the couch with a bottle in one hand and the TV remote in the other, playing a random episode of Friends. Italicized Friends. Alejandro went to the kitchen and prepared a microwave dinner. He hoped for a nice, quiet night. 2. Santi was in front of his local corner store on a snowy New England afternoon. He was wearing a hoodie, sweatpants, and a Red Sox beanie. He was on his phone, mindlessly scrolling through Twitter, trying to pass the time until he heard a car horn in front of him. He looked up and saw his cousin's car. The passenger seat windows rolled down, and he saw his cousin. That feels like it should be implied, right? You could even just, I don't know, you could streamline that to say, like, he looked up and saw his cousin's car, and then his cousin rolled down the window and said, "So are you going to get in or not?" Or something like that. Yeah, you can tighten that. Anyway. "So are you going to get in or not?" he asked Santi. Santi smiled and entered the passenger seat. "How you doing, Matt?" Santi asked him, giving him a fist bump. "I'm doing all right," he said, returning the fist bump. "You hungry?" "I could use a bite." "I heard a Raising Cane's opened up on Boston Street. We should check that out." "I gotcha," Matteo said, driving to the Raising Cane's. I feel like I don't need to say it, but again, you can just clean up this dialogue in the same way as I've previously suggested. Because the dialogue itself is, like, mostly, quite real, right? "How you doing, Matt?" "I'm doing alright. You hungry?" "I could use a bite. I heard they opened up a Raising Cane's on Boston Street. We should check that out." "I gotcha." Yeah, like, that sounds real enough to me, right? And so it's just kind of the words around the dialogue that need a little touching up. Matteo drove, and Santi looked out the window without saying anything. Usually he would talk with Matteo about his day and the latest Boston sports news, but he just looked and watched the snowfall. "Can you lend me some money, Matt?" Santi thought, preparing to ask Matteo. Okay, if that's a thought, remove the dialogue tags from around it. I got some pre-rolls in the glove compartment. You can smoke one if you want," Matteo said. "Nah, I'm good. Thanks for the offer, though." This you'll want to write as THOUGH. Matteo looked at him for a second and continued to drive, making his way to the drive-thru where they ordered their food. That feels implied, right? I would delete that. Making his way to the drive-thru. When Matteo paid for the food, Santi noticed the money in his wallet. He looked to have at least $100. Thank you, Matteo said, taking the food and parking in the nearest spot. Here, he said, giving Santi his food. Thanks. They ate, and Santi stayed quiet, wondering how he would ask Matteo for the money or if he even should. Anything wrong, dude? Matteo suddenly asked. No, why? Santi lied. You haven't talked much since you got in my car. Seems like you have something on your mind. Santi thought for a second and decided to tell him. Okay, well, honestly, I didn't want to hang out with you just to hang out. I also wanted to ask you something. And that is, Matteo asked. Well, I'm behind on my rent, and I was going to ask if you could if I could borrow some money. Okay. I think I said this in yesterday's video too, but you don't want to use ellipses in dialogue because you can just replace it with character action, which will be a lot better. Uh, do more of that showing versus telling, right? So you could write this as just as a rough preliminary example. Well, comma, Santi scratched the back of his head. I'm behind on my rent, and I was going to ask if you could. He brought his hand down and scratched his thigh. Borrow some money. So there, like, what I'm trying to do is show Santi's nervousness in asking, right? And personally, I think that would be more effective than the ellipses. Like I said, it's showing versus telling, right? Because something is clearly happening during these ellipses, right? Something must be going on during that pause. So describe that to us, right? It's a perfect opportunity to do more showing. So anyway, I picked that one up from one of my professors in my writing program right now. Always replace ellipses with character action. So Matteo pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head slightly. Santi, I love you, I do, but I know you and the people you borrowed money from. I'm not giving you any, I'm sorry. Come on, dude, I changed. You know I'm good for it. Oh, you are not good for it, dude. Oh, sorry. Oh, you are not good for it. I would take that out of caps, but I would italicize it if you really want to emphasize that word. Do you know how many people came up to me asking for their money back from you? Matteo said, intensely looking at Santi. You're lucky I didn't tell them where you live now. Where you live now. Yeah, well, I changed, and it's not like I'm asking for a lot. It's just like $100, Santi said, taking a sip of his Sprite. I saw the money in your wallet, so don't act like you don't have any to spare. I'm sorry, but I can't give you the money, and I can't give you the money in good conscience. If you want money, get a job. You know I can't get a job, Santi snapped. I don't even have a high school diploma. How the fuck am I going to get a job? Dude, asking for money isn't the way to go. Besides, there are tons of jobs you can get without a diploma, like McDonald's or some shit. I'm not working at a fucking McDonald's. They sat. Okay, sorry, I just want to pause to say, like, this is pretty effective dialogue. We know who's saying what, right? There are no unnecessary dialogue tags here. There's some good intermixing of action between the dialogue, which is nice. And yeah, I was pretty enthralled there for that conversation, and it's not quite over yet, so let's keep going. They sat awkwardly for a few seconds, and then Santi asked another question. Can you show me how to make money? I mean, my job isn't hiring, but I'm sure I can help you with an application. No, Santi interrupted. I mean, how you used to make money before. What do you mean? Wait, no, I am not showing you how to rob people, Matteo retorted. It's insane how you were even asking me that. Again, take this out of caps, but italicize it if you want to emphasize it. But also, I wouldn't, because you already emphasized the not up here. And again, that's just something the reader is going to clock, and it's going to seem redundant, right? So you can italicize one of them. I would take both of them out of caps and italicize one if you really want to put the emphasis there. Uh, oh, come on, Matt. You know you made a lot from that. Yeah, and you know where it got me? 2 months in prison and probation. That's where it fucking got me. He took a sip of his Pepsi to calm down. I don't want you to end up like me, Santi. It's not worth it. There was another moment of silence. Um, I would rephrase that. I would, rather than just saying, like, there was silence, you could describe something that Santi notices outside the car windshield or something like that, right? There's another way to communicate that, like, neither of them knows what to say, right? Dude, you can't keep doing this shit, Matteo continued. You're 21 now. You have to grow up. And why don't you just move into your parents' house? I'm sure they'll let you in. No, I'm not going back there. Well then, I can't help you. Santi opened the car door. Thanks for nothing, he said, slamming the door and calling one of his friends. Hey, Sammy, remember that offer you gave me? I want in. Um, I haven't really been timing myself, but I imagine we've got like 20 more minutes. We'll see. San Salvador was bustling with street vendors and people walking around, buying from them. It was extremely hot, and Alejandro was sweating through his shirt while sitting on the sidewalk with his friend, Luis, drinking water from a plastic bag. You heard what the government did to those rebel fighters? Luis asked, taking a sip from the bag. Okay, I'm guessing this is a memory, um, which is why everything is in italics. Yeah, but we'll see, I guess. We have Alejandro. Yeah. Yeah, this must be a memory from Alejandro's time in El Salvador, right? Um, yeah, you heard what the government did to those rebel fighters? Luis asked, taking a sip from the bag. Yeah, I did, Alejandro said. An older man began playing the guitar nearby and started to sing. It's getting violent, Luis said, looking up at the sky and noticing the doves flying. It's fucking bullshit. Those Americans love to talk about freedom and justice, but the moment we want to end this inequality in the government, what do the Americans do? They fund that government and they help them slaughter those fighters and everyone else. Those Americans don't care about freedom unless it's for their companies. Um, I would say that dialogue's like just a little too on the nose. Like regardless of if it's true, like I don't know. Eh, I mm, I don't know. I guess we don't really know Luis's character yet, but it just I don't know. Is that really how someone like Luis would say this? Um, like I don't know. I struggle with how to explain my issue here. I think the only way I can kind of say it is like that these are the author's words more than the character's words, right? Characters rarely say exactly what it is they're thinking, right? Because people rarely say exactly what it is that they're thinking. We usually funnel it through, I don't know, through sarcasm, through hyperbole, that sort of thing, right? Or, or a good example, through a lot of swear words, right? Um, Maybe Luis is the type of guy who just swears a lot, uses swears as filler words, right? So I like that he says it's fucking bullshit, but then everything after that is like I said, it's a little too on the nose, right? And like I said, it's correct, but people rarely kind of say things as poignantly as this, right? Um, yeah. So I don't know, just throw something in there, some kind of vocal quirk maybe, or some uncertainty or yeah, something in there, some stuttering even, just to make it seem a little more real. Because the sentiment, I believe that Luis, does want to express this sentiment, but Luis, like all people, probably has a hard time expressing himself, right? And I don't know that he would do it this eloquently in like casual conversation. Maybe that's the issue, is that this feels like a casual conversation, and yet this dialogue feels, like I said, too poignant, too precise, right? Anyway, again, that one is kind of opinionated. People are free to disagree with me there. Luis finished his water, putting the plastic bag inside his pocket, and turned to Alejandro. It's very, very conscious of Luis not to be littering. Good for him. So have you thought about it? I mean, I don't like what the government is doing, but I don't want to fight in this war, Luis. I'm sorry. Alejandro, they are going to kill all of us. I don't understand why you don't want to stop them, Luis asked angrily. Luis, you know me. I don't like fighting for anything. So what will you do when the military eventually comes here? I'm leaving El Salvador, Luis. Alejandro blurted out. I'm moving to the United States, to my cousin's house. Are you kidding me? You're running away? Luis asked angrily. Um, This is a problem, a pretty consistent problem with adverbs across all writing, is that they're unnecessary. They're redundant, right? Are you kidding me? You're running away? Luis asked angrily. I think we already got the sense that Luis was angry, right? We don't need that adverb there to tell us that. So, in fact, again, this is another instance where you could probably just cut out the dialogue tag entirely and just say, are you kidding me? You're running away? Because it's clear who's speaking, right? So we'll keep going. You see how bad it's getting. I don't want to fight in this. I want to feel safe. You aren't going to be safe in America, Alejandro. Luis looked intensely at Alejandro's eyes. all of those cowards who go to the US and say it's safe are liars. There might not be a war there, but those people won't see you as an equal. They'll only see you as the was he cut off? Or I think there was supposed to be something there. Anyway. Alejandro moved his head away from Luis, but Luis tilted his chin so Alejandro could look directly at his face. Ooh. They'll only there we go. Okay. So I think he did pause here. I think he was like I think he cut himself off just based on the what Luis says next. So you can make that clear by doing an M dash at the end of this dialogue, or you could even say they'll only see you as, comma, Luis couldn't say the word or something like that, right? They'll only see you as a blank, Alejandro. That's all they'll see you as. Luis moved his hand away. Luis moved his hand away from Alejandro's chin and looked down at his feet. I don't care what they see me as. They can call me whatever they want. I want to feel safe. Alejandro placed his hand on Luis's lap. I know you want to feel safe also. Luis looked deeply into Alejandro's eyes. Come with me. I don't want you to die for this stupid war. Please, Alejandro pleaded. Luis looked back at his legs and removed Alejandro's hand from his lap. We're all going to die someday, and I would rather die fighting for my people than flee to a country that caused all of... Luis's words were cut off by a bullet being shot at his head. Whoa! I did not see that coming. Yeah, that's... Eesh, talk about abrupt. His blood splattered on Alejandro's face, and he fell to his side, his last breath leaving his body. Alejandro looked away from his friend's body, and he saw them, the death squads. They were shooting everyone in the city. Men, women... Men, woman, children. I think you probably meant women. Yeah, and that's just a little typo. The soldier who shot Luis looked at Alejandro. He was about Alejandro's age. The soldier smiled, pointed his gun at Alejandro's face, and pulled the trigger. Oh, okay. So so that confirms that this was a dream, and then the next line really confirms it, right? At least I think it was a dream. Alejandro woke up breathing heavily. His heartbeat was racing, and dried tears were on his cheeks. He sat up and tried to calm himself down for what seemed like hours as the sound of cars drove past the house. It was just a nightmare, he whispered to himself, still shaking. No one died. I didn't see any of the death squads. Luis is still alive. Okay, I like that because my initial thought about the death was like, okay, that feels kind of like a cheap shot to the reader, right? Just kind of a shock value twist sort of thing. And yeah, I don't like that. But if you're telling me that it really was just a nightmare and none of that actually happened, then I think that makes pretty good sense. I don't know. I think it only makes sense for Alejandro to have a dream like that. If it were me, actually, a thought I had, you could make this whole bit the first part of the story because I think so far it's the most engaging part of the story, this argument between Alejandro and Luis. Yeah, this might not be a bad place to start. Take number 3 and change it to number 1, right? Just a suggestion. At least, okay, we've switched to present tense again. You'll just want to say, at least he thought Luis was alive. After he fled El Salvador, Luis cut all contact with him, most likely joining the FMLN. I never want to see you again, were Luis's last words to him? Question. I don't think that's supposed to be a question. Another thing that was so engaging was just like the opposing ideologies there, because I felt like both of them had a point, right? Like it's hard to say which one of them was wrong in this instance, if either of them even were wrong, right? I think Alejandro's point that he just wants to be safe no matter the strings attached to that safety, whereas Luis wants to remain home and wants to fight for his home, even if that results in his untimely death, right? So I think those are good clashing ideologies. At least I think so personally. Yeah, let's keep going. Where were we? You stupid bastard, Alejandro whispered. You stupid fucking bastard. He put his face on his hands. Alejandro checked his watch and saw that it was 5 a.m. He had the day off today, so he might as well get up now. Period after 5 a.m. He got up from his old mattress on his cheap bed frame and stretched his back. It always felt like his body was getting weaker by the day. He should have spent his free time exercising. Maybe his back wouldn't have hurt. He should have done a lot of things differently. He went to the bathroom, and when he arrived, he found a basket full of his roommate's dirty laundry that he had forgotten to clean. Alejandro sighed, pushing it out of the way to get to the bathtub. He set a timer on his phone for 10 minutes so the water bill wouldn't get high. He got inside the tub and turned on the water. He let he let the warm water hit his face and took deep breaths to calm himself from the nightmare. Okay. Well, I do appreciate the clarity and how economic the storytelling and narration has been so far. I think some of these actions might not be entirely necessary for us to see. It's like in a movie, right? Let's say you're doing a scene where a character wakes up from their bed and they grab their glasses off the nightstand. Um, Unless those glasses are really pivotal to the scene, then the glasses don't even need to be in frame until the character grabs them, right? Because once they grab them and bring the glasses into frame, it's the audience just infers automatically. They know, right? Oh, he was reaching for his glasses, right? There's no need to give any more attention to the glasses than that. And I think in this paragraph, there are certain inferences we can make. So I like the detail about the roommate's laundry basket that he forgot to move and setting the timer for 10 minutes to try and curb the water bill. Um, but then like he got inside the bathtub and turned on the water. I think you can just streamline that by saying like he turned on the water, right? Or I don't know. I don't know. I yeah. I hope this is making sense. I don't know that I'm explaining it to the best of my ability, but yeah, I just think you can streamline some of this, that's all. He heard the alarm ring, got out of the shower, and dried himself with a towel. Oh, that's another thing was, it seemed like he was gonna take a bath, but then he actually was taking a shower, right? Um, and I get that it's a combination bath and shower, but yeah, maybe I was the only one thrown by that, but anyway. He heard the alarm ring, got out of the shower, and dried himself with a towel. He looked in the mirror and couldn't help but feel that the best times in his life were behind him now. The time frame of having a fun life was closing, and he was just riding the wave of his later years. Even then, that was starting to come to an end. He shook his head and got dressed so that he could start his day. Usually, when someone has the day off, they're excited to use it to relax or find ways to be productive. Except Alejandro. Alejandro wasn't a big fan of his days off. While he enjoyed his time alone, it often got quite boring after a while. There are only so many telenovelas a man can watch at home until he goes insane. So again, I feel like I just feel like some of this narration can actually be kind of streamlined. Yeah. He walked to the living room and saw his roommate, still passed out on the couch with the TV playing a random 80s movie he didn't recognize. Alejandro got his coat and beanie and left his apartment to the nearest 7-Eleven. Um, is that how 7-Eleven would be written in a story? Hang on one second. This is nitpicking, but now I'm curious. Yeah, so 7-Eleven is the number 7 dash the word 11. 7 hyphen ELEVEN. And again, call that nitpicking, but I don't know. It was still snowing, but not as much as the day before. However, it was still challenging to get to 7-Eleven, as there was still ice on the sidewalk that nobody bothered to put salt on. Again, like, that's just a sentence that we can streamline, right? Like, um, there was less snow than the day before, but ice remained on the sidewalk. As such, it was challenging to get to 7-Eleven, or something like that, right? You can do it better than that, I'm sure. But anyway. When he arrived at 7-Eleven, the same young man who was always at the entrance asking for money was there, although he was wearing a blanket and shivering this time. Again, we could streamline that sentence a little bit. "Hey, could you please spare me a couple of bucks? I need bus money, I swear," he pleaded as Alejandro was just about to open the door. Normally, he would walk past him without even making eye contact with the young man, but considering the circumstances, he took out $2 bills from his wallet. "Thank you, you're a lifesaver," the young man said, grabbing the money from Alejandro's hand, getting up and going to the bus stop. Alejandro smiled and made his way inside. 7-Eleven was one of his favorite places when there wasn't much to do on his days off. It was the place where he could be alone yet not feel lonely, where there were people his age who would play the lottery. He would sometimes watch and hope that they would win. It was where he could get comforting. Huh. Oh, albeit overly pri it was where he could get comforting, albeit overly processed food for cheap, be by himself, and talk to people playing the lottery. So that feels like contradictory because it sounds like, he goes to 7-Eleven because he wants to see the people there, but then one of the reasons he likes it is to be by himself. And then in the very next phrase, like I said, it feels contradictory. Talk to people playing the lottery. Also, we're in Massachusetts, right? Hang on one second. Okay, I just had to make sure gambling was legal in Massachusetts. Anyway, that is the kind of attention to detail, by the way, that a lot of editors will look for, so be aware of that. Anyway, he went to the back where the coffee was located and got himself a cup of black coffee. Again, we could even streamline that just by saying, like, he went to the back and got himself a cup of black coffee, right? We can infer that that's where the coffee is located once he gets himself the cup of coffee from the back, right? Anyway, along with a few packets of cream and sugar. He then went to the front, grabbed a chocolate-covered donut, and placed it on the counter, where the cashier processed his order. "Hey, Alejandro, how's your day?" he said, processing his order. Uh, so again, we have the gerund that we're kind of used to at this point, but also, like, that's that's pretty blatantly redundant, where the cashier processed his order. "Hey, Alejandro, how's your day?" He said, processing his order. You don't need to do that, right? Like, "Hey, Alejandro, how's your day?" he said, and you could just leave it there, right? "It's okay so far, Mike." Mike smiled. "Put in your phone number, please." Alejandro did so, even though he never used his reward points. He probably had enough to buy every item in the entire store. I like that. It's a nice detail. I also it's just, like, quirky that Alejandro likes 7-Eleven so much. I like that as a character trait. Yeah. He sat on the window-side table, opened the cream and sugar packets, and put them in the coffee. As he was stirring the coffee, he saw the pile of newspapers next to him and grabbed one. He finished stirring, opened the newspaper, and started to read it, even though he never really understood it most of the time. Not in the sense that he didn't understand English. He had lived in this country for about 40 years. He could understand the words well enough. It was usually the contents of the paper that confused him. He never understood or cared about this country's political scandals, controversies, and corruption. To him, American culture was like a new pair of shoes that needed to be broken into to feel comfortable. But no matter how long he wore those shoes and how many times he hit them so they could break, they still never felt comfortable. I'm not sure I quite understand the metaphor. Like, yeah, I'm not quite sure because, like, initially it sounds like Alejandro's thinking, like, he's not interested in American politics because they don't compare to his memories of El Salvador, or, maybe he's only interested in El Salvador, and maybe that's what the metaphor is trying to get at. But yeah, like I said, I'm just not quite sure. I'm sorry. He flipped the pages until he reached the newspaper's comic section, the only part of the paper that he truly enjoyed. He read the latest Peanuts comic strip, which featured Sally talking to her school building, with it responding. "It is kind of nice not having a bunch of howling kids around," the building said. "Of course, this is the day when the custodians wax my halls. I hate that. They don't even use Novocaine." Alejandro chuckled. So, I think we'll leave it there. Um, I'm interested. I'm interested to know what happens to Alejandro, and more so, I'm interested to know what happens to Santi, which it sounds like our next section is more about Santi, because I feel like the stakes are a little higher with Santi, where it's like he needs money and he's willing to rob somebody to get that money, and he alluded to something up here. "Hey Sam, you remember that offer you gave me? I want in." So yeah, I'm more interested there because it sounds like we have, like, some stakes, some uh action, I guess. Whereas with Alejandro, we have some more slice of life, which is totally fine. You know, there's a lot of value in slice of life stories. Um, and I guess there are some stakes where it's like I can see his desire, right? I see that he, in many ways, wants to be young again. He probably misses Luis a lot, right? Which is another reason that we maybe start with the memory from number three, um, because Luis is clearly very important to Alejandro and will probably be important to his character progression. So yeah, I would say that's maybe the first thing to focus on is like the stakes, right? Like, why should a reader read this story? And when you submit this to literary magazines, why should they choose to publish this story over other stories? What is it that makes this story engaging, right, and gripping? Why would they want to publish it, right? So yeah, focus on some of these character stakes because I'm interested to know what will happen to these characters, and you can rearrange some things to make sure that the reader wants to know immediately, right? Now, as for my second main piece of critique here, I brought it up a lot, but just streamlining some of the language. I think Andy, for the most part, your voice is very clear and consistent, which is awesome. But there are just a bunch of little things that start piling up, right? So a really good technique actually is to just read your story out loud and ask yourself, does it sound natural when I read it out loud, right? Or are there parts that sound unnecessary? Are there parts that sound redundant? Are there parts that sound too weird, right? Yeah. So yeah, those are my main pieces of feedback. There is a lot of good going on here. And like I said, I sympathize with writing a really long story. And it looks like you're doing something complicated, which is switching between two main characters, which is a nice challenge. And probably, like, I imagine for you, Andy, that was probably fun to write, right? I, uh, I actually did a similar story not that long ago. It ended up being 27 pages, I think, which was way longer, like I said, than I had initially anticipated. So I can totally sympathize with you here. Um, yeah, just keep going with this. Like I said, streamline some of this language. Um, find what sounds natural and what sounds both quick and engaging. Um, I'll say this. This is another quote from one of my professors in my writing program right now. The last thing a reader wants is to be aware that they're reading a story, right? So any moment that the language pulls the reader out of the story, that's a bad thing, right? You don't want the language in any way to distract the reader, whether it's through errors like grammatical errors or structural syntactical errors, whether it's through repeated words and phrases. Uh, you just want the story to be told, right? That's the main thing to focus on. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. Andy, like I said, keep going with this. I think it could be very attractive to a lot of literary magazines if you just kind of, yeah, brought it up to what it is the editors are looking for, which is, again, an engaging story with stakes and a well-written, streamlined story. So keep going, and I think this could be a real hit. And keep writing other stories too, for that matter. So thank you again for submitting this, Andy. Viewers, thank you for watching, and we'll leave it there. Keep in mind, ultimately, this is a rough draft.